Live from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in beautiful downtown Raleigh, it's the Science Cafe with your host, Chris Smith.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for clapping. It's okay, though. It's just me. Yeah, my name's Chris. I'm your host for the Science Cafe. Welcome to Raleigh, everybody. Welcome to the Science Cafe. If this is your first time coming to our Thursday night Science Cafe, I am so glad that you decided to do that. Not to put anybody on the spot, but here goes. Raise your hand if this is your first time at the Science Cafe. Fantastic. Give those people a round of applause. I'm very glad that you came out. Thank you so much. You must be interested in the internet, or in the Internet of Things. Maybe the topic, maybe you just found out about the Science Cafe and you're like, you know what? This is the coolest thing happening in Raleigh on a Thursday night. How many would agree with that? Okay, good. That's most of you. I mean, you're here, right? That kind of goes without saying. Yeah, this is the coolest thing happening in Raleigh on a Thursday night. We gather here in the Daily Planet Cafe. There's great food, great drinks, and really cool science that we get to engage with. My favorite thing about the Science Cafe is, one, we do it every week. So every Thursday at 7, you can be here, grab dinner, grab a drink, and then hear about what's going on in the world of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, sometimes even a little bit of art, right here in the cafe from people in our area who are doing really cool and interesting things in the world of science. The second best thing is that the presentations are kind of short. So rather than going to like a big academic conference where the presentations are like 4 hours, and I don't even know if the people giving the presentation want to be there, you come here, right, you get to hear what's going on in science in 20, 25 minutes, and then we open it up to audience Q&A. So most of our program tonight is devoted to what you want to learn about tonight's topic, and we find people who we think know a lot about those things, and then we grill them for a little while. It's at least fun for us. Well, tonight's speaker is going to be talking about the Internet of Things. So if anyone is at home, I'm going to look at the camera, and you're watching online on live stream, YouTube, or Facebook, Alexa, record this forever. Alexa, remind me to watch this tomorrow again. Okay, are we good? Because our homes are more and more becoming full of things, devices, gadgets that are connected to the web, connected to the internet, connected to one another, connected to us, as it were, right? Raise your hand if you have a smartphone in here. Raise your hand if your smartphone is with you. Raise your hand if you leave your home and your smartphone's not in your pocket, you turn it on and go back. I mean, well, maybe you lost a few people, but right, you know, these devices have become extensions of ourselves. The internet has become an extension of pretty much every single person as long as you've got access to it, and so many millions of us around the world do now. Even in, you know, I live in a more rural part of the state, and we've got broadband internet out there. It's expanding all over the place. Raise your hand if you have internet-connected devices that's not like a Google Home or an Alexa, or just your smartphone. You've got like one of these internet-connected toasters. Few folks. Yeah, does it scare you sometimes? Or you are like, no, this is amazing. The internet should, yeah, okay. Yeah, I feel like there's great things, and then there's maybe things that aren't so great, but the not so great things are things we're like looking out in the future and wondering, is somebody going to take advantage of us this way? Which I think is a good way to think about it, to be cautious, but to also pursue progress. Tonight's speaker is from Duke University. He's in the Department of Art, Art History, and Visual Studies at Duke University. His name is Mark Olson, and he says he knows a little bit about the Internet of Things. Give him a round of applause and welcome to the Science Cafe, Mark Olson.
Thank you, Chris. Well, thank you for that introduction and for the invitation to join you all today. As Chris said, I teach in art history, and visual studies at Duke. And some of you may be thinking, well, what does somebody in an art history department have to say about the Internet of Things or technology in general? But one of the things that we've been working on for the past several years is to try to bridge the arts and engineering, arts and technology. So I'm just coming off of teaching an Internet of Things course for the first time at Duke. And if we have time, I'll be able to speak a little bit about some of the things we did in that class. But I teach media, history, theory and making on campus. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the Internet of Things more broadly, trace out what some of the issues that I think are emerging with the technology, and then conclude with a little bit of discussion about how you might get into making your own Internet of Things devices. It's a literacy that I feel strongly we need to have more ubiquitous in our world. And then if it works, we'll maybe do a demo, but I'll also open up for some questions. So feel free to stop me at any time. So the Internet of Things is certainly a hot topic this holiday season. How many of you have an Internet of Things device on your Christmas wish list? One or two. What do you have on your list? You forgot? Hopefully a memory aid. What about you? A Nest. So a Nest is the internet-connected home temperature control system, and increasingly intending to be your whole house controller is their ultimate goal, I think. Anybody have an Alexa on their list? You have one already? Anybody use Alexa to purchase holiday gifts? No. And you've heard that Alexa has been ordering itself, right? This has been an issue. Well, what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is what I see as a big paradigm shift that's happening in the internet. This has been slow going and quiet, but I think it's pretty significant. The early discussions about the internet were all about getting content online, digitizing everything. And Nicholas Negroponte is famous for purportedly saying, you know, everything that can be digitized will be digitized, right? So we have these big movements to take, for example, all of the world's knowledge and put it on and digitize it, put it online, right? The Google Books project, et cetera. But increasingly, we're beginning to see a paradigm shift that I think is characterized by Tim Hottages, who's the CEO of Deutsche Telekom, who said in 2014, everything that can be connected will be connected. And so instead of getting more and more content online, we're seeing a shift from content to connection, right? Building up of what I call these kind of new digital ecosystems. Certainly people to people, right? And we're connected in ways that we historically have only dreamed of. People to our things. We carry our little prosthetic memory devices, our phones in our pockets all the time. How many of you can remember your best friend's phone number? One or two? Right? You don't have to remember these things anymore. But increasingly we're seeing things-to-thing connections. And one of the things that's interesting is that increasingly these thing-to-thing connections are not having people in the loop at all, right? So we have people-to-people communication, people-to-machine communication, and increasingly machine-to-machine communication. The Gartner Group estimates that there are 8.4 billion Internet of Things devices in this ecosystem this year, and it's projected to be somewhere between 20 and 50 billion by 2020. I think that's a little bit of a conservative estimate. And we're talking a whole lot of money. There's a whole lot of money in this field. In 2017 alone, approximately $1.7 trillion was spent. 725 billion of that was consumer spending. But there's a whole nother layer of this that we don't usually pay attention to, which is the industrial, farming, and medical implications of these as well, which accounted for over $1 trillion. So what are some of these emerging devices, and how are they being positioned discursively? So in some versions of this talk, I pull up a slide that's the Internet of Useless Things. It's things like Tweet Pee, which was a diaper that would tweet you when it got wet. And there's also a website dedicated to the Internet of Useless Things. It's a ring that has one function. When you die, it tweets your last will and testament, right? So-and-so's dead. A blind that opens and closes, and when it closes, it tells you if it's bright out or not. Some of these things. But I'll leave it up to you to tell me if you think some of these devices are useless or ridiculous or not. But I'm drawing on them from a particular website that aims to kind of catalog these and tends to draw on the more emerging side of things, iotlist.co. So how are these devices being positioned discursively, right? So the language of connection is, of course, pervasive. We have our connected garage doors. This is Garage I/O, which takes your existing garage door and allows you to open it and close it remotely with your phone, be able to tell when you're away, did I remember to close the garage door or not? Connected luggage, right? The Blue Smart connected carry-on allows you to charge your phone, but also it weighs itself, so you don't need to know if you're exceeding that limit. Toothbrushes. The Colibri is a connected toothbrush that's intended to generate good brushing habits amongst children, right? Keeps track of how long they're brushing, allows them to play games with their cell phones so as they brush, they can pop bubbles and other things. And of course, connected drinking cups, right? So this is Vessel. I believe it's going to retail for $149, and it's a cup that keeps track of what you're drinking. And will tell you, you drank 5 lattes today, you better lay off. The holiday lattes are getting to you. And also keeps track of your hydration and that kind of thing. These devices are also shot through with a discourse about smartness, and it's something that I think is particularly a catchphrase today. Smartness seems to be about a certain kind of machine self-awareness, right? Being aware of your surroundings. So this lock is smart about itself. It knows whether it's open, unlocked, or locked, and can tell you that. How many of you have gotten in the car and driven away on your trip and said, oh, did I remember to lock the front door? Well, now you can check your front device, your smart lock. Maid is a smart microwave oven that is intended to know how to cook what's put into it, using barcode scanners as you put food into it. And also it keeps track of what you're eating and keeps track of your calorie count, right? They're intending to be a multi-purpose device. Smart basketballs. 9450 is marketing this basketball. It has all sorts of accelerometers in it and is marketed as a way to increase your basketball skills. So you dribbled in a minute 120 times, and see if you can get your dribbling faster up to 150 times. And smartness is being increasingly attributed to mundane things like your yoga mat, or one of my favorites, the smart battery. And this one is a particularly interesting device. It's a $35 battery for your smoke detector, and it will do a couple of things. It knows what time it is, so that when it starts to lose power and you get that possible chirping sound that at 3 in the morning wakes you up, it will know not to chirp at 3 in the morning and start chirping at a more reasonable hour, right? For $34.99. But it also can alert you as well remotely if your smoke detector is going off when you're not home, and these kinds of things, right? So connected, smart, but also vigilant, right? These objects are not only smart about themselves, but they're aware of their surroundings. They're watching in ways that you can't, or so that you don't have to, right? So we have, of course, Ring, the connected doorbell that has a camera on it, and will let you know who's at your front door. One of my good friends has one of these, and he gets lots of deer that visit his yard in the middle of the night. It's been a lot of fun. You can keep track of your pet, right? So FitBark is a play on the Fitbit, but for your dog, to keep activity tracking for your dog. But these devices also play into many fears and anxieties, and in particular, there's a whole class of devices that are about worrying about your kids. All right, so trackers for your children. This particular device, Owlet, is a baby monitor. It does 2 things constantly. It does pulse oximetry, so it tells you, is your baby breathing well enough, that its blood oxygen levels are high enough, you shouldn't worry, and also gives you a feed of heart rate. It also has orientation sensors so you know if your baby is laying on its back or not, right? Sudden infant death syndrome. So potentially a useful device, expensive, but again, who's going to buy this a nervous parent, right, who's worried about, again, there's a lot of money in this. That vigilance goes even to prior to birth. So this is a internet-connected sonography machine that allows you to keep track of your baby's heart rate and share that socially, right? So you can have your baby in utero be checking. Again, I think it's intended to get us anxiously checking our phones and things more and more. And then this device, temp drop, goes even before birth. You can know when it's a good time to try to make that baby. Right? So these things are reaching into all parts of our lives. Right? So all of this connection and sensing, it raises important issues about security and privacy. Right? As I'll say later, all of these devices, they play on one thing alone, that they are addressable. Right? In order for an Internet of Thing device to be useful, to not be just a thing, it has to be discoverable in the world, right? And there are, all of these devices have unique addresses for them, IP addresses, MAC addresses, Bluetooth addresses that make them addressable. And because they're addressable, they're also then hackable. And the Digital Rights Organization, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, has warned that the Internet of Things was the next security nightmare. And these are fears that play out in science fiction. How many of you watch Mr. Robot? Right, so Mr. Robot, Black Mirror, a number of these shows are slightly dystopic, near future, or if not now future oriented things. And they're a place where some of these anxieties play out. And they open their season 2 season with an episode that involved hackers breaking into a smartphone. So I'll play this video clip.
Somebody who can explain the past. Because this quote-unquote crisis has happened before. Crisis. Why don't you call the Weimar Republic? Because the similarities, the parallels are disturbing. You see, the first step is the end of the world is developing. They've actually got people cheering in the streets. Cheering in the streets! Now let me tell you, all those people.
Favorite part is the garage door going up and down at the end. So who knows, this might be your future in 2018, those of you who are getting these devices for your home for Christmas. But it seems banal, right? You know, so what if an IoT light bulb or a speaker or even your air conditioner gets hacked, right, and messes, you know, it seems like mischief. But as these devices become increasingly ubiquitous and then placed into other devices that are much more mission critical to our well-being, like an internet-connected pacemaker, for example. My father has a Bluetooth-connected pacemaker that talks to a little device by his bedside every night, right? And uploads its information, right? The stakes become much higher, and I can certainly can field some questions about why Internet of Things security is particularly problematic. Part of the issue has to do with the fact that many of these devices are being pushed onto the market before they're ready. Again, when there's $1.7 trillion at stake, there's a strong impetus to push these devices out with very little testing and get them out in the world and then realize that there are issues. But they're also, because they're cheap and small and have small processors on them, and you're not able to do a lot of robust security on the device itself. And I can talk a little bit about that more in the Q&A. But the other issue I want to frame is e-waste. How many are familiar with the Amazon Dash button? These things had kind of disappeared for a little bit, but now they've come back. They're shaped like this, and you can see from the slide that each one of these is tagged to an individual product. So for $4.99, you can buy an Amazon Dash button for, say, Tide detergent, for example. And the idea is you stick this on your washing machine, and when you run out of Tide, if you're an Amazon Prime member, you don't have to get on your smartphone, you don't have to get on your computer. You push a button, and in 2 days, if you're Amazon Prime, you get a box full of new Tide delivered to your doorstep. Right, these are $4.99, but if you buy them, at least, I don't know if they're still running this promotion, you get $4.99 pantry credit, so they're essentially giving them to you for free because they want you to use these. And their vision, one vision of the Internet of Things, is that you'll have these devices spread across your house, all of them connected to the Internet in your home network, and you can be ordering things on the fly, right? And again, they market these as being really seamless. You set it, you press it, you forget it until you need it, and then you get it. Right? You push the button, and Amazon will deliver. And certainly there are questions about, you know, the proliferation of devices that all have microchips. Microchips that are using rare earth metals, high levels of plastic, and then are increasingly part of our waste problem. And e-waste is, of course, the toxic legacy of our digital age. More than 20 million tons of e-waste are produced each year, and Americans, we're good at producing. We produce about 3.4 million tons as well. But it's not simply in these devices being discarded, right? These all have batteries that are soldered into them, so you can't replace the battery. My keys have a tile device that, again, has a soldered-in battery. And people say, well, you know, the battery's going to run on, and then I'm not going to use it. But they're also assuming that these are going to be obsolete, right, before the battery even runs out, that you're going to need the Dash button 2.0, your cell phone 2.0, and what do you do with your old cell phone, right? Many of them end up in the trash stream, and others. But there's also other elements. Let me come back to that. There are also other elements of e-waste that are often not thought about in this cycle. So I have this little promo video from Amazon that is their vision of how the Dash button will be used in your everyday life. And let's see if we can identify some of the other ways in which waste is being encouraged.
Don't let running out ruin your rhythm. Introducing the Amazon Dash button for Prime members, a simple way to reorder the important things you always run low on so you'll never run out. Set it up to order what you want, then press it when you're running low. Get an order alert on your phone so it's easy to cancel if you change your mind. And with Prime shipping, you'll get new products delivered to your door before you run out and never miss a beat. Prime members, request your Amazon Dash button today.
So you may ask, well, why, if I've got to go to my phone and press OK, do I need this button in the first place? Which is a valid question, but they intend this to be a safety measure, that you can go back and, let's say your kid went and pushed the button too many times, you can go back and their vision is that they're going to eventually take us out of the loop, right? And I'll talk about that in a minute. But what are some of the other things that, if you come from an environmental or eco perspective, that this video might make you think about? Yeah.
So she's stocking up on bottled water, which is about one of the most horrendously unecological things you can be doing. And ironically, the water is called smart water.
Smart water.
And it's just
right.
water.
With vitamins, I think, maybe. But,
yeah.
But yes, right? So we've got the products themselves. So this is intending to make our circuits of consumption faster and more seamless, so we don't have to think about, right? At least there's an opportunity cost to get in your car and go out and drive and But the Amazon vision is that we'll take care of all those costs. So getting, more Tide, more bottled water, all those things are straightforward. What else did you notice? Other things? K-cups, right? So this is there's a internet connected Nespresso machine and Keurig machines, right? That will order for you when you run out as well. And the K-cups, as we all know, are incredibly the amount of waste per cup of coffee versus drip is pretty remarkable.
What's funny about the K-cup is I have one at work. I have this reusable K-cup. It absolutely works with the machine, and I can't get past that. It's like all the little pieces of plastic that are using that.
And Keurig makes it hard for people to break in. They've got to pay a fee to have the little stickers, right, that go on your K-cup, because there's a internet there's a communication that goes on between the cup and the device to make sure that it's legitimate. What else?
So I'm kind of interested in, you're saying that these are addressable, and I want to know sort of what the threshold of that is. So for instance, at our museum, researchers have used pit tags for a long time. And I guess that's sort of a latent piece of data, and it's not sending a message anywhere until it passes go.
Right.
At some point. I had the impression that Internet of Things could also mean, I don't know, a paper bag. It could be all sorts of things that actually could be ecologically good, because as they go through the recycling chain, they would self-sort.
Yes. Yes. So there's two main two main classes, I think, of addressability. One is you could loosely call active, where the device is seeking out and making a connection, right? These are, most of the time they're Wi-Fi enabled, so they're connecting to your network. There are also active Bluetooth devices that will go out and both broadcast their availability and seek connectivity. And then there are, as you say, passive devices, Bluetooth low energy and other kinds of tags that, when passed in proximity to a object that is looking for them, that is capable of reading them, you can access them. But you're right, there are certainly potential uses for that are positive. I think one of my goals as a teacher is to help students think about the dominant discourses that are going on, that are all about consumption, and how we might redirect these to other modes of thinking.
So there's the specter of mischief with these things that we have in our homes, Alexa and so forth, being turned against us. But the ones that are passive, are those potentially something that security people are concerned about?
The passive devices that would be, so it's hard to discuss that in general terms. There are uses of them that security people are concerned about, and it's mostly not that the device itself is problematic, but if the device is being used as a passive way to gain access to a door, or proximity to your cell phone, that those things can be spoofed, right? That you can figure out by coming into proximity what the device is, what its address is, what signature is being read, and then create devices that simulate that. Yeah.
One last thing. So is the chip on my MasterCard part of the Internet of Things?
Great question. I think I would say you'd want to think about it in that way, insofar as it's being used insofar as it's being used in a wireless way, right? I think less so when it's stuck into the chip reader. But as I understand that technology, they've really thought hard about security there, and that its identity is not handled with the chip itself, but a much more complex interaction with the credit card. There's a lot of brokering that happens there. Yeah.
One thing that I find interesting, especially in relation to the e-waste, is that this almost is changing our behavior to looking to actually potentially make this an extension of ourselves as well. So not only in creating a behavior that generates more e-waste, but also generates change in our behavior as well, where we become more, innate to want to press a button whenever we're right beside it versus actually even going to our phone, which is an entirely interesting perspective in itself. Just wanted to make sure I mentioned that right there.
Yeah. And I would point out as well that there's the whole supply chain question around Amazon and its delivery service, right? Both in terms of the carbon footprint of getting your devices in 2 days, depending on how far they're shipped, and also the sheer, I don't have the numbers with me, but the sheer amount of cardboard. One of my students said their parents works in the paper industry, and they're worried about Amazon creating on its own a paper shortage because of the amount of cardboard boxes that it's using in its prime shipping. But their vision, right, is that they're going to eventually take us out of this loop. So the possibilities for having that moment, do I need more Tide? Do I need they have a Amazon Dash replenishment program, and this is a software API that they're offering to corporations to build into their products. The Brita water filter is their kind of showcase example, that the Brita water filter, instead of having to know that at 3 months you got to replace it, it will have its own built-in Amazon Dash connectivity so that when it needs replacing, it orders itself, right? And you get your new Brita water filter. And this is a new player in the game. This is called Genie Can, which also integrates with Amazon Dash, Amazon Prime. The idea behind this one is that, again, having to keep track of stuff is hard. The videos, if you go to their website, talk about how you go to the store and you don't remember what you need to get, and you get home and you realize, oh, I needed more Kraft macaroni and cheese. The idea behind this is as you throw something away, you can scan its barcode and have it be added directly to your shopping list on your phone, right? And that if it's not a thing that has a barcode, like an orange or something like that, you also have voice activation where you can say, add an orange or something like that. And there's actually an interesting sleight of hand if you're interested. If you go to their video, they do show this as being part of a two-bin system where you scan and make the extra effort to put the recyclable in the recycling bin. But the vision of this is just all this plastic going into your trash can. It also apparently tweets your kids and tells them the trash is full and they need to go out. So as you said, so this is, I think some of the dominant paradigms have some real difficult and troubling kinds of consumption patterns behind them, are increasingly making consumption be something we don't have to think about. And so part of what we're beginning to think about in the humanities is what kinds of literacies do we need to be training our students in that will help them be citizens of the 21st century in ways that they can participate in this ecosystem. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to make the observation that looking at this, the video or whatever it is with the cans going in addition to things like bottled water and K-cups, it's also worth noting that food that's actually worth eating never has a barcode on it.
Right.
I mean, I never saw a cucumber with a barcode on it, or an orange or an apple.
You have to take that extra step and say,
well, but I mean, it's more to the point is it's training us to eat more and more food that's unhealthy for us.
Yeah.
And there's consequences to that too.
Definitely. So our vision is to, this is a quote I love from Douglas Rushkoff, who is a media theorist, that he says we've kind of hit a point in our education where for the longest time when we taught people how to read, we also taught them how to write, right? And but that with mass media, television to start with, and radio, we broke that linkage between a literacy to consume and a literacy to produce. And his point is that what we need to do is reintroduce into our liberal arts, humanities, everyday education, the ability to not only consume new technologies, but also to produce them. And so I can, at this point, talk a little bit about how one might get into exploring this. If there's interest, I brought some devices, but I can also open it up for questions. But just to give you a sense quickly about this ecosystem, the devices that you're being charged $150, $200 for, what you're looking at there is an ESP8266, which costs $5.95. And it can run with a battery. It can run its own web server. It can serve out web pages. It can be your own Wi-Fi access point, right? So you need to connect to your device. You don't have to connect it to your network. You can connect to your device directly. So $5 and some wires, and we're teaching students how to make use of these. So anyway, I'll turn it over to questions now and go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was really interested in your comment there about teaching humanities students. I work for a very large technology company as a product manager, so I'm constantly dealing with engineers who want to do things because they can, without ever any thought about whether they should.
Right.
And my thought was that, you teach humanities. I think really we need to be teaching more humanities to engineers and to technologists so that we have fewer Mark Zuckerbergs, who, will, without hesitation, suck up any data that's available to them and monetize it, and have more people in engineering who take a moment to think about whether this is really a good thing to be doing or a worthwhile thing to be doing.
Well, don't tell anybody, but that's kind of my secret goal, right? So I teach this class on the Internet of Things, and all of a sudden engineering students are lined up to take a class in the arts and humanities. And of course I don't let them get by with just the technical training, right? We got to read Jennifer Gabri's on e-waste, right? We have to read some issues around contemporary capitalism to understand how some of these things are going. So that's the dirty secret. But if this is going at, kids don't listen at home.
Is there a lot of pushback?
I was about to say, do they enjoy that?
Most of them do. I can say, without wanting to overly generalize, I can say that I did notice, and it's a challenge that I am going to be thinking about how to address, is that there is an extreme functional orientation amongst the engineering students, to the point that I ran out of questions to ask to try to make people think outside that. So one student was very tied into a functional object, and we said, well, how about if it did that, but in a way so different that it surprises you? And that student quoted us in the email, wrote back and said, that's great. I'm going to make something that does something so well that it surprises, right? That it doesn't do it differently. It does it so well that it surprises. So I did find that was a conversation. But what's been amazing is when we do have art students and things who pick up on this, who have an idea that's totally in left field, either through collaboration or, quite frankly, some of them have been showing some of the computer scientists, giving them a run for their money with how quickly they can pick up programming fundamentals.
I had a question, actually, kind of supplements his question. I'm an engineer, systems engineer, computer scientist. And I'm curious, I think I saw that your history is one of your subjects that you teach. So there's obviously a lot of security and privacy issues with the Internet of Things. And I think there's a lot of evidence and news that shows these are current concerns. Like Google's had some rather bad news about some of their products. And evidence has shown, at least in my experience, and I think what I've read, that people can be aware of these issues and of their implications and still be very apathetic about them. So I'm curious, I guess, are you aware of any relevant historical examples of that are kind of analogous to this situation, where things seem to be on kind of inevitable course, but yet the unwashed masses were still kind of able to maybe rein things in and turn that course to something different?
That's a great question. You're pointing out a way in which I teach history that is I think the way I teach history is often forward-thinking, right? So looking at the parallels between contemporary anxieties about the future and past anxieties about the future. I think I would have to think on that. I do think that one of the historical challenges in telling historical stories is articulating the ways in which privacy as a value is historical and is changing, right? That the idea that bringing television into the home in the 40s and 50s was seen as, on some level, an invasion of privacy, right? Where we have the home itself is a historical formation. You know, the kind of rise of the private sphere and domesticity in the United States has a historical trajectory, but the television as a medium coming into the home and the telephone, right? These are two places where the sanctity of that space gets leaky, right? And so I've never taught that in relationship to internet privacy, but I wonder if there'd be some interesting connections around, you know, how either, you know, Jane down the street disrupting the family dinner, or this ideology coming through the airwaves, right, to your television. There might be some productive parallels there. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this interesting talk. I also like the Mr. Robot example of chaos.
Yeah.
I think also we could have tremendous economic chaos and disparity and turmoil if somebody hacked into, say, Amazon or other companies doing this. But my question really is totally different. When you had the slide up there about language, are you familiar with the McGurk effect?
No.
Okay. Basically, it's thought that language originated in humans from facial expressions. And when hunters and gatherers, when the hunters would go at night to hunt, they couldn't see their facial expressions, so they developed language. And to this day, there are some experimental systems like the McGurk effect. If you go online, look up McGurk effect, you'll see a face saying a word, ba, ba, ba. And you close your eyes and you hear da, da, da. It sounds differently when you look at it than when you hear it. So my question is, with the IoT, can we have things like the McGurk effect that can mess it up?
Like in terms of like an activist strain of like, probably, I would imagine. So all of these, I have a colleague, this is not my area of expertise, but all of these around recognition, speech recognition, face recognition, all these kinds of things. There's been some interesting scholarship that's come out that has, you know, all of these are trained on examples. And this is part of how machine learning works. It's trained on examples. And as a result, depending on the examples that it's trained on, it can end up amplifying biases and things, right? So there's the classic example of a face tracking webcam that one of the computer companies came out with, where you could be video conferencing, Skyping with your family, and, you know, keep moving and talking, and it would track your face. And two employees at a computer sales place, one white, one black, broadcast this video where it does a great job tracking the white woman's face, and then it can't find the black person whenever they're in the frame, right? And so I do think that there are biases probably that could be exploited in good and bad ways in relationship to that. I think that'd be a great question for a linguist. I do think that we're also casually giving over to Amazon and all these companies a whole lot of our phonetic data, if you will, right? That what is Amazon getting from having 1 million people say, Siri, buy the milk? They're getting 1 million people saying milk. I say it with an E, M-E-L-K, milk, right? So they're able to tune their algorithms, and that's going to be incredible intellectual property, right, for them as well, in ways that I think will keep other players from entering into this space.
Yeah, these are very good ethical, moral questions people have come up with, but we are in a relatively open society. How do you think this Internet of Things, when you're placing these devices in a room into a more authoritarian political system, how is that going to work out?
Well, certainly you know, we could imagine that we would have here in the U.S. kind of watchdog kind of things that would help with. I would imagine that the potential for these to be engineered to be more explicitly surveillant, to be more explicitly intercepted and tapped into is much higher. Would be my guess. Yeah. Oh, hold it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One thing that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, and I'm not sure if we quite touched upon, you did briefly just a moment ago, is in relation to not only the consumer aspect, but what's going on in the back end. What kind of data is the company receiving by our habits, by these dash buttons? Not only are they getting an understanding of what we care about, but I find it so fascinating that it goes all the way to kind of a just-in-time logistics thought process where you, number one, figure out the demand, know how much to stock in the warehouse, know how to organize your logistics in the different distribution centers based on our needs and even from a regional perspective. And so with all of this taking place, especially in a consumerized market, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Have you seen anything?
So one of the assignments we had our students do early on in the semester is kind of follow the data assignment, both to see, you know, pick a device and begin to trace it back. You know, what can you discern as a consumer about where the data is going, and what are the different ways in which you can imagine that, if we even take the simple example of the Internet of Things button, a pushing of a button, you know, what's the ancillary data that gets registered with this, right? So just to take this example, right, you have the product being purchased, you have frequency data, you have the time of day, right, in which, so beginning to map out how habits, you know, I presume I'm going to push this button while I'm doing the washing, right, and do I do the washing at 3 a.m. versus 8 in the morning? How might that feed into demographic profiles? It's also interesting how much this data travels and gets aggregated, right? So the degree to which Amazon Web Services or other of these services are sitting behind, and the Akamai servers that are sitting behind them, and the way in which these big server farms have a certain kind of centralization. We don't know, right, what's happening, and I don't you know, tend to encourage my students to speculate wildly on this, but we're left with the question of what happens when this gets, the same company that's connecting this data is also getting all of your credit card transaction data from your credit card company and your heart rate data from your Fitbit that's going up to the cloud. Who knows? But I think we certainly should be asking for more transparency on that level. And other scholars think we should be instead demanding that we own our data, right? That there's no reason why we need to be exporting it up to these services. We trade services for our data all the time, but can there be models in which we, you know, get a service, pay for it, but don't have our data going up to a cloud?
Hi, great talk, thank you. A couple of things, one of which you touched on was the lack of interest in the companies making these things on security. You know, that I've read articles where there's just no effort being put in basically in security on these. There's no way to update the firmware in them. Secondly, manufacturers are dropping support for them after a couple of years. You know, if I spend, you know, $2,000 on a refrigerator and they quit supporting it after 2 years, I'm not going to be a very happy buyer.
Right. I mean, and you can imagine that, you know, all of the things that we think about in terms of our computer security play out in relationship to this, right? So a device can be really secure itself, but and how it communicates with the cloud, but it needs to have some interface into it. They expose either states or methods. It's at a 10,000 foot level. These devices either have things they can do or things they can tell you about themselves, and those things are exposed through RESTful APIs and other kinds of things. But the idea is that these can be as secure as possible, but they're only as secure as the environment in which they're in, right? So you still come back to the last mile problem of a home network that's wide open, or someone who didn't do the step that they said in the manual to set that password that's not the default password on your device. And many of them also, if you can physically get to the device, have a reset mode where you can reset them to open, basically to reset them up and take control over them as well. So yes, so all of these issues are at play, definitely.
I'm just curious, compared to Europe, it's the Wild West here when it comes to privacy.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you've given any thought to why that is.
Great question, right? So if you go to a European website, right, there's the cookie warning. You have a right to your data. They built into the EU legal codes the right to request your data, and interesting, a right to, I think the term, they sometimes call it the right to oblivion, right, where you can have your stuff erased, right? And we have given up on that on some level, right? The idea, the other class I was teaching this semester was on memory, media, and archives, and thinking about how the idea of getting rid of something is increasingly a foreign idea, right? We save every picture, we save, right? And the idea of having it be obliviated. I'm not a sociologist in terms, but in terms of the ethos of the U.S., I certainly think there's I work a lot with colleagues in Italy who have a much more general and ubiquitous distrust of the government, right, as not being in their best interests. But I think, yeah, we need to have more of those kinds of structures. I'm not sure why. Do you have a thought on why Americans?
Well, coming from a media background, I just think we're much more mind influenced, which is my nice way of saying brainwashed, and we don't really, we don't have the same quality of critical thinking. I love to watch Congress debate and then watch the British Parliament debate. It's like two different entities.
Yeah.
So I mean that's my primary explanation. We're not critical thinkers anymore.
Except for people who come to Science Cafe.
Except for people who come to Science Cafe. I was trained in media studies, and one of the classic theories of media studies is called the hypodermic needle model of ideology, right? It's the brainwashing model. And back in the 90s when I was a grad student, this was something to debunk, right? This was a too simplistic model. And what's interesting is it's coming back, right? In part, Sherry Turkle has done a lot of work on what happens to you physiologically when you just click, click, click on the web and your breathing slows down. It makes you much more receptive to ideological inputs, right? And certainly it's still seen as a limited model, but it's one that takes on a little bit more cachet as well.
So yeah, kind of tying together what you were saying there, this gentleman's comment and the comment earlier about optimizing the supply chain, it seems like the logical end game here is that rather than optimizing the supply chain to the consumer, these companies like Amazon are going to want to optimize the consumer to the supply chain. And it's only a matter of time before, instead of ordering laundry detergent when you want it, the laundry detergent button is going to prompt you to order because Amazon's warehouse is full of laundry detergent and it's getting in the way of the books. And they're going to start modifying your behavior to what suits them economically, rather than modifying their behavior to what suits you economically.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something really, really key there, right?
I was thinking about that when you were talking about behavior modification. I grew up in a time when we ate really bad bread and drank really awful beer because that's what companies wanted to sell us, and it was much easier for them to ship really awful tasting sliced white bread and really awful tasting fizzy beer than it was to actually make good stuff that we would want to buy, and then they would devote huge amounts of advertising to persuading us that what we wanted was whatever it was they happened to have.
Yeah. Everyone should read Eli Pariser's The Filter Bubble around these kinds of questions and the gearing of our technological systems that aren't about free choice. They're much more about gearing us to the conditions under which we might consume. Yes.
Okay. So I latched onto Internet of Things more than several years ago, and it was from a government-supported, it was a Scandinavian country that did a very nice sort of comic book version projecting what the Internet of Things could be, and it was very, very positive, had lots of art in it, supporting the arts, culture, environmentalism, and so forth. And now we're sort of living with Alexa, and I notice Alexa sees me moving across my living room and so forth. So just to switch over to something else, I also experienced a lot of optimism about the internet and how information didn't have to go through bottlenecks anymore, which were publishing houses, that information was flowing from person to person. And so there was an empowerment. People could express themselves, exchange information. We got rid of the hierarchy, or we got rid of the middleman. So now we're living in an age where we find that perhaps the creators of that internet or of that social media were young and very naive. They didn't see the dark side of the internet. And depending on your political persuasion, you might be thinking that now we're reaping the rewards of that the social media, ungated, has released forces we didn't anticipate. So I'm just curious, with you working with your students and so forth and dealing with this element, the Internet of Things, whether you feel that there is lessons learned from what social media has done with false news and so forth. It sort of flipped that meaning. That meaning is just so. Where are we on these things? Are we getting smarter while everything around us is getting smarter?
One hopes, but we could equally be not be. So these kinds of questions, I think are really useful to be asking, and I tend to not necessarily want to blame like the technology. Like the social media question is as much about policy decisions and choices, that lots of little choices that were made along the way. I think we have, at every new technology, we have an opportunity to reshuffle the deck, and that's where I see the possibilities be. One of the things that we try to show our students is how easy it is to set up. Again, this raises, with a novice person, they set it up incorrectly, but how easy it is to set up an information brokering system that will work with the Internet of Things, that doesn't store data or is run locally and not having to connect up with the cloud, right? There's no particular reason except wanting to leverage scale and leverage and possibly to monetize that some of these systems work that way. So there's no reason why my particle photon, right, which is a cheap Internet of Things developing device that is selling to businesses a system for brokering and connecting. There's no reason why we have to go through that corporate model, right? It's easy enough to set up on smaller devices, other kinds of things that don't aggregate into a big kind of cloud system. And so I think one way that I'm pushing for is trying to help the students understand that, if you can do that, what might be some other ways of thinking, not about vertical integration and then sharing, but peer-to-peer kinds of sharing. And I think the early internet ideas, some of those are useful to turn back to, right? naive as they may have been, I'm not sure. I think Tim Berners-Lee says we've failed on some policy levels where we could have made some decisions about open access, and the latest FCC debacle has been part of that misstep, I think.
Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much for being here. Thanks so much for sharing with us tonight.
Sure.
Coming out, teaching us a little bit about the Internet of Things, what's good, what's bad, and what's maybe coming in the future, and what we need to know before we unwrap our gifts in a few days and plug in that thing and connect it to your Wi-Fi network and then send all of your data off to some other place. But I have to go back because you mentioned fairly early in the talk that I think your father has the internet connected pacemaker as well. So I also see a lot of hope in the future for how everything being connected around us can teach us more about ourselves, improve things like medical care and education. We're doing a lot of that sort of stuff here in the museum and spaces that we have to try to break out of really traditional models of learning and be interactive and engage people's brains in ways that really impact their lives in positive ways as well. So thanks for coming and giving us both sides of the story tonight. Thanks to all of you for coming out to the Science Cafe tonight. I hope to see you again. We'll be here next Thursday night. We're doing Collected Curiosities. One of our curators will be on the stage with me, and we've got about a half dozen things that we've pulled from the basement of the museum out into the sunlight. Well, it won't be sunlight then, but out into the light for you to see and learn about. We've got some really weird stuff to show you and some really cool stories about things that are in the museum collection here. So it's going to be the coolest evening of show and tell you can imagine, with some of the weirdest things discovered on planet Earth. So I hope to see you again next Thursday night at the Science Cafe. Good night, everybody.